Well, most people are unaware that at least one baby per week in an Australian hospital survives the abortion attempt on his or her life and is then left, often gasping for breath, to die a sometimes long and painful death. Now, this came to the fore last month when brave whistleblower midwife Louise Adsett sensationally testified at a Queensland parliamentary inquiry into the issue. Here's a reminder.
This is not an uncommon occurrence. Just recently, a mother decided to abort her baby at 19 weeks. The same misoprostol regime was started, and this little baby was born alive again, moving, gasping for air, and having a palpable heart rate, and once again, over 400 grams.
Well, viewers will remember that an urgency motion the very next day was moved in the Australian Senate by Victorian Senator Ralph Babet, and it was voted down, including by Liberal senators in the Senate, Simon Birmingham and Maria Kovacevic. Now, one person who was aware that this atrocity is happening in our hospitals was our former Prime Minister Scott Morrison. Now, in a moment, I'll speak to former Coalition MP George Christensen, who wrote to Morrison imploring him to support a bill in the Parliament to protect these babies. This was a couple of years ago. We will reveal what Morrison said in reply. You won't believe what you're about to see. But before I come to that, some background. The issue of babies born alive after abortion attempts on their lives is not new. Courageous Liberal state MPs Dr Mark Robinson and Nick Goiran first raised the issue in the Queensland and Western Australian parliaments respectively about 8 years ago. Despite providing official health department data, they were ignored by their colleagues and by the legacy media, neither of which is interested in the truth. I wrote about this and their heroic efforts in the chapter on abortion in my book, I Kid You Not, Notes from 20 Years in the Trenches of the Culture Wars. Now, George Christensen kindly read my book and then decided to take action whilst he was still in the Parliament. He drafted a bill, the Human Rights Children Born Alive Protection Bill, and moved it in the Federation Chamber of Parliament House in Canberra. It went nowhere because there is little appetite from federal MPs and senators to do anything for human rights for unborn babies or to support their mothers. Sadly, 100,000 unborn babies lose their lives every year in this country. George Christensen joins me now. George, as someone who's been trying to wake people up to the reality of babies born alive and left to die, what was your reaction when you saw Louise Adsett's testimony before the Queensland Parliament?
Look, it's horrific to hear that testimony, and indeed I heard similar testimony while I was researching this whole disaster, really. It's a disaster that befalls upon our nation, the fact that children are born alive and then not given any sort of treatment whatsoever simply because they're children born that the practitioner and the mother believe shouldn't have been born. It's horrific. And so hearing that testimony only just validates the effort that I went to and it validates the effort that others are going to. And I just want to give a quick shout out to people that were there from the very beginning. And thank you, Lyle, for reminding me and others that it was your impetus that actually caused this bill to come into the Parliament in the first place. I drafted it and Senator Alex Antic was sitting there behind me as I moved that speech, and Senator Matt Canavan told me that once I'd left the Parliament he would continue it on, and he has. So I'm very glad to hear that.
Yeah, no, well, I appreciate those words, but the real heroes are Nick Goiran and Mark Robinson, who I mentioned earlier, who really got the ball rolling some years ago and, as I said, were ignored. But, you know, full credit to what you've done, and Senator Antic and Canavan and Babet and Malcolm Roberts and others who have got behind this initiative.
Robbie Katter in the State Parliament.
And Robbie Katter, absolutely, because as a result of him raising it in the Queensland Parliament, that's what created that parliamentary inquiry where Louise was able to give that first-hand account. It's one thing for, it's important for well-researched parliamentarians to get up and give the data, but no one takes any notice of that. And sadly, it looks like no one's taking any notice of Louise Adsett. That's why I want to have this conversation with you today. Now, George, when you were in the Parliament, you wrote to the then Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, about your Human Rights Children Born Alive Protection Bill. you received a reply from Scott Morrison, and you went to the extraordinary length of publishing that reply on Facebook, and I think with good reason. I want to quote from this letter. Here's what he said. He said, "Access to pregnancy termination is the responsibility of the states and territories and subject to their respective legislation. This access is an important element of the reproductive and sexual health services the Commonwealth Government supports for Australian women, and we continue to work with states and territories on the availability of safe and legal abortion Australia-wide." End quote. Now, clearly, George, this is not a pro-life response, and it's certainly not one that Christians and pro-life conservatives would expect someone like Morrison to give.
Yeah, no, it's not at all. And the background to it is that these private members' bills, such as that I raised, often just sit on the shelf. So I was trying to prod the Prime Minister into at least letting a debate happen on this, and perhaps even a conscience vote. I would have preferred the government actually support it. To get a letter like that back, I got to say that my first inclination was Scott Morrison did not write this, and I still today believe that he didn't. It was written by some backroom staffer, probably written even by the department.
But George, just let me interrupt you there. Scott Morrison, we all know that prime ministers and ministers don't write their letters, and that's reasonable. They're busy people, but he did sign it, and so presumably he read it.
Signed it.
He signed it, and he put his signature there.
Yeah, which. Disappointing to say the least. I would not have expected that kind of response from Scott Morrison, but it actually just goes to show part of one of the reasons.
That's reasonable. They're busy people, but he did sign it, and so presumably he read it.
Signed it.
He signed it, and he put his signature there.
Yeah, which. Disappointing to say the least. I would not have expected that kind of response from Scott Morrison, but it actually just goes to show part of one of the reasons that I got out of the Liberal National Party, actually, Lyle, but one of the reasons that the Uni Party, both Labor and LNP, are both committed to Australia having wall-to-wall access to abortion services pretty much on demand. And if you have a look at that, that's the case because in New South Wales, it was the Liberal and National Coalition that actually pushed for abortion reform. Yep. And they're also, that same letter, I can't remember the wording, but indeed it said that we're committed to rolling this agenda out globally through our foreign aid program.
You're absolutely right about that.
That was quite concerning.
He boasted about Australia's overseas aid and that we give taxpayers money to abortions in poor countries for poor women so they can abort their babies. You're quite right about that. And George, you're also right too. You mentioned New South Wales. It was the Liberals who saw abortion to birth come in here, but also in 2022, it was the Liberals in South Australia who introduced it. So this is no longer the preserve of the radical Greens who used to drive this and the left of Labor. It's now, as you say, a uni-party issue.
And to think that you would have Liberal senators voting against and getting up and giving speeches against a motion that would actually do nothing, Lyle. That's what I want to clarify. A motion that would do nothing, but a motion that actually said, we support medical treatment, appropriate medical treatment going to babies who are born alive as a result of abortion procedures. Why on earth would anyone vote against that? Why on earth? Yeah. When they poll the Australian public, overwhelmingly people want intervention here. They want medical treatment appropriate to the needs of the child. So it could be palliative care in the instance that the child is not survivable, but there are instances where the child is survivable. We know that from testimony of people who've been at these births. We know that from the data, and so they should be given all life-saving care that can be afforded to them. There's something wrong, Lyle, with a situation where at one end of the hospital a premature baby is born and all of the support services are wrapped around that baby to ensure its longevity and its survival. But at the other end of the hospital there potentially could be an abortion going on, a baby being born alive and just simply put in a medical waste dish and left to die. That is inhuman. And the reason I put a bill before the federal parliament, it's actually in breach of the international covenants that we've signed up to, namely the civil and political rights. Everyone deserves the right to life, and also the rights of a child. An international covenant there on the rights of a child, which actually says that every child has the right to life, and every child should be afforded healthcare, particularly life-saving healthcare. So we're in breach of our international covenants while this actually goes on.
Absolutely, George. George, you spent a long time in the Parliament. Why do you think this issue of human rights for unborn babies, this issue of abortion, is such a touchy subject, and why do parliamentarians not want to deal with it?
Well, the left doesn't want to hear about it, and I've got to say any pro-abortion MP doesn't want to hear about it because I think it pricks at their conscience. We can have the hoary old argument that, it's my body, my choice. But when it's outside of the body, whose choice is it? And it presents the stark reality to people. What we're talking about here is ending a baby's life. So they want this to go away. I mean, there were so many submissions that came in federally saying, oh, this is not an issue. This doesn't occur. This never happens. But at the same time, oh, don't pass the bill because it'll cause a problem. Well, why would it cause a problem if it never happens? Yeah. They know it happens. They know babies are born alive and left gasping until their final breath, sitting in basically a container, a little steel container that's designed for placing medical waste in, and that is just absolutely atrocious, Lyle.
It sure is. Well, George, the Louise Adsett testimony has come and gone. How do we keep the plight of unborn babies alive, and along with that, their chances of staying alive?
Well, I think it's just all hands to the deck. You're doing what you can do with my Citizen Go hat on. I'm the head of pro-life organisation Citizen Go in Australia. I'm going to keep pushing that. We need more motions to Parliament. Even if they are defeated, we need a bill to come before Parliament that gets a vote on it, both state and federal, until we get the scourge fixed. I think that we've gotten pushed back on the pro-life movement for so long, where we think, the end is nigh and we can't do anything else on this issue. But this is one issue where we can do something because the vast majority of people are actually on our side. And the more and more we keep prodding it, I think the closer we're going to get there. This will be a decade-long fight, perhaps even a generational fight, Lyle. But it's a fight that needs to be had while babies are dying in medical waste containers every day.
Well said, George. Look, I know our viewers are very grateful to all that you've done and what you continue to do through Citizen Go. Really appreciate your time today here on ADH TV.
Thank you very much.